host, Dr. Deb, and this is a place where we talk about all sorts of clinical and research issues having to do with psychology. Now, in the last few recordings, I have been talking about personality disorders, and today we're going to begin to look at the cluster B personality disorders. And they are different than the cluster A ones in that there's usually more of an emotional component to these various disorders. Now, there are 4 of them. The first one is antisocial personality disorder, which I'll be discussing more in this video. Then there is narcissistic personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder. And there's a bit of overlap in terms of behaviors for these various disorders. For example, antisocial and narcissistic have certain overlaps. Narcissistic and borderline overlap, and borderline and histrionic can overlap. And as I talk about each one, when I get to the ones with which they overlap, I'll point out how they do. Now, these are the disorders, personality disorders, that a clinician is likely to see most of. These are the people who, for whatever reason, end up in a therapy session, as opposed to cluster A, which consists of people who tend to stay self-isolated. So I would not necessarily see one of those people in my office. Whereas I've seen people who can be diagnosed as antisocial, I've seen borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic. And a lot of times I'm working with people who have others in their families who have these types of disorders. And my job is to help my client understand how to interact with their family members or friends who are demonstrating these types of behaviors. Now, I'm going to be talking today more about antisocial personality disorder. Now, what is that? Well, in general, somebody who can be diagnosed as antisocial is somebody who tends to not follow the norms of our society. You've probably heard of the term psychopath or sociopath. Well, those are both not diagnoses that a clinician can give because it doesn't fit into the diagnostic and statistical manual, but they both fit under a more umbrella term of antisocial personality disorder. Now, I will talk more about psychopathology and sociopathology in a few minutes, but let's talk more specifically about antisocial personality disorder as it can be diagnosed. Now, first of all of the criteria for this diagnosis must be seen after the age of 18. However, the individual also must be able to have shown similar sorts of behaviors before the age of 15. So you've got childhood behaviors and then adult behaviors that are all similar. So in order to diagnose somebody who is over the age of 18, the person must demonstrate at least 3 out of a series of about 6 types of behaviors. And I'm just going to read them off because I don't want to forget any. So first, lack of empathy or lack of remorse. So somebody who doesn't understand other people's feelings or care about other people's feelings, nor if the individual hurts somebody else, the person just doesn't care, has no attachment to how anybody else feels or is likely to respond. Number 2, as I said, nonconformity to society. So it's someone who does not want to follow the rules most of us will follow. So for example, I'm not likely to go out and shoot anybody. Somebody who has an antisocial personality disorder may have no qualms about going out and shooting somebody. Deceitful. Somebody who is antisocial has no problems with lying in order to get what he or she wants. Again, it goes back to not being remorseful, not following along with society's norms. Another one is being impulsive and not able to plan for the future. So that indicates certain problems with the cerebral cortex and logic functions and planning functions. So they have difficulty being in control of themselves, and also problems with holding off being rewarded for what they do. Additionally, they tend to disregard safety for themselves or for others. So I heard of one case where actually this was an incident that was written up by the person who came up with a specific test for psychopathology by the names of James Hare, I think that's his name, where he came up with a bunch of questions, a questionnaire, and he tried it out and all. And when he actually took the questionnaire himself, he realized he had a lot of the same tendencies, psychopathic tendencies, especially in terms of doing things like being reckless. He said he remembered one time when he insisted his children go bungee cord jumping with him without him thinking, oh, they may not want to do this, they may be scared, and they may get hurt. And then he realized that was something that he did, that he put other people in danger, and he didn't think about it at all. So, again, being very reckless. Also, another criterion is being consistently irresponsible. So, say somebody who has a job and decides to blow off going to work all the time and just does stuff other than what he or she has agreed to do. That's being consistently irresponsible. Then finally, the last criterion has to do with being aggressive and irritable. Now, research indicates that people who have psychopathy are more likely to be aggressive and violent than people who are sociopaths. However, as I will explain, there can be different reasons for the way that anger shows up. So, again, when I say sociopath and psychopath, they both fit under this personality disorder, but they are different. The research suggests that people that we consider to be psychopaths are actually born that way. They have certain brain differences. For example, their amygdalas are smaller on average than more neurotypical people, and smaller than those people who end up being labeled as sociopaths. Now, at one point in time, I was conversing with somebody who was diagnosed as a psychopath, and she stated that yes, she understood rules, but she was not emotionally tied to anybody or anything, but she knew what the rules were supposed to be, and she would follow the rules just to prevent being punished. So she knew she was supposed to protect her little sister, so she would do so. She didn't care anything about her sister. She just was trying to avoid punishment. So that was all that really mattered to her. Now, somebody who's a sociopath, they actually can become emotionally connected and bonded to others. So, for example, I once knew someone who was a sociopath. He loved his father, he loved his dog, but if anybody did anything that this person thought was in any way attacking or giving a problem to his dad or his dog, this person would lash out violently. For example, to the level of when his father and a neighbor were having a discussion about grass clippings in the driveway, this person took a 2x4 and hit the neighbor in the head, which obviously is not the best way to handle these kinds of disputes. So that can show you a difference between a psychopath and a sociopath. It has to do with the emotional content. Both of them can be aggressive. Supposedly, psychopaths are more likely to be aggressive. But as I will explain, there can be psychopaths that never show aggression. So let's get into some of the statistics about prevalence. Now, prevalence of antisocial personality disorder estimates range from about 1 to 4% of the population. Now, there are going to be certain locations where that percentage goes up. For example, people who are in the penal system, in jails, somebody who breaks the law, somebody who has an antisocial personality disorder, breaks the law, gets caught, ends up in the penal system. So that's why there are more there than in the population at a whole. Now, additionally, say if somebody who's 40 comes in and could possibly have a antisocial personality disorder, that person's more likely not to be diagnosed with that. And why is that? Because, as I said, some, say, people who have these kinds of disorders, they do know the rules and they will abide the rules because they don't want to get caught. And so, even though they do have these tendencies and may be, have all those categories, or at least 3 out of the 6, they just are good at not acting in a way to be diagnosed, so they don't ever get diagnosed. Additionally, it's very hard, even say somebody who is in the right age range and is showing these kinds of behaviors, it can be difficult to be able to give the diagnosis if there's no childhood evidence. If, say, a client comes into me and has maybe been court ordered for assessment because of doing very antisocial kinds of things, if I have no access to childhood records and the client does not reveal any sort of childhood behaviors, I cannot give this diagnosis. Because remember, I mentioned at the very beginning, it has to be actions over the age of 18 and actions that have been seen under 15. So a child who's been labeled as oppositional and has maybe been in the juvenile system could then be labeled with or given the diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. But without the data, a clinician can't do anything. Now, additionally, and I have to check my notes to make sure. Let's see. There is a genetic component, especially with those who can be labeled as psychopathic. There is often a relationship in the first level of first degree relatives. So siblings or parents may also demonstrate the same kinds of behaviors. And sometimes it can be more manifest in or shown when people are in groups like gangs or whatever. Sometimes just having others who have similar antisocial behaviors can elicit those around to do this similar sorts of things. Now, in terms of male versus female, men tend to be 3 times more likely to be able to be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder than women. So it's definitely more common in men. But in order to make sure it isn't anything else, I mean, there are a lot of other disorders that can mimic or have similar types of behaviors. For example, somebody who has a substance abuse problem could potentially be labeled as or given the diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. And that happens. I've worked with people with substance abuse disorder who have been given that diagnosis, but when I talk with them, it turns out they really were pushed to the behaviors that had led to that diagnosis because of the substance abuse and their desire to maintain, well, to be able to get their drug of choice. So, they end up breaking into stores or whatever in order to get the money to buy the heroin, whatever. Also, people who are bipolar may, in a manic phase, be irritable and aggressive and not following rules as well. So you have to rule that out as well. Or schizophrenia, or some of the other personality disorders. So one has to go through everything to make sure, or go through the person's history to make sure it truly is the behaviors are the result of an antisocial personality disorder. So that's all that I was going to cover on this particular personality disorder. Next time, I will be focusing on borderline personality disorder. And so that's all I'm going to talk about personality disorder this time. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about the holistic approach to mental health. Now, there is a subdivision in psychiatry that's actually called nutritional psychiatry. So I'm not sure how prevalent this is in terms of practitioners out there, but it is an area. And the thing is, there's a lot of research that indicates that what you eat really can affect one's mood. And so the research indicates that if you eat a more green or cleaner type of way of eating, it helps with alleviating depression, helps with sleep, and pretty much everything in terms of mental health. Now, I think I mentioned many videos ago, we do have one nerve that goes from brain to stomach, and it goes both directions. It's the only bidirectional nerve we've got. It's the vagus nerve. And so, there's also the fact that our stomachs produce more serotonin, which is the chemical that helps us remain calm, and it helps with mood and things like that. There's more produced in the stomach than in the brain. So it's sort of like a feedback sort of thing. You're feeling emotionally upset, your stomach gets upset. If you eat comfort food, that helps make your mind calmer. And so there's this combination that works, back and forth between the mind and what you eat. And so the best thing to do is to work on getting in appropriate nutrition. At least this is my approach. And sort of on a daily basis, check to see how you've been eating and how you feel. And sometimes it takes a day or two for what you've eaten to affect your mood. So if you are having some mood issues, it might be useful to have a food diary. Just write down what you ate every day, and then say, look how you feel, and also write down how you feel on the days, and see if you can find a relationship between what you ate and how you feel. Maybe the next day, or 2 days later, and that might be a way to help with alleviating some mood and anxiety problems just based on what you eat. So until next time, when I will be talking about borderline personality disorder, if you found this to be useful, please ring the bell and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Pass this along to friends or anybody you think might be finding this to be interesting. And as I mentioned a few videos back, when I get to 1,000 subscribers, I will be giving doing a drawing to give away one of those devices I showed early on about that helps with reducing anxiety and insomnia. So see you next time. Bye.